She hid her pregnancy from her ruthless millionaire boss. Months later, what he did shocked everyone. "Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty bless every woman with unwavering strength, endless grace, and a heart that shines with divine love. May He honor the mothers who nurture, the sisters who guide, the wives who stand steadfast, and the daughters who fill our homes with light. May no woman ever feel ignored, undervalued, or weak. For in God's eyes, she is a queen, a pillar, and the heartbeat of every family. My dear family, remember that true greatness lies in how we respect, cherish, and honor the women who shape our lives. Without their love and wisdom, the world would lose its beauty, its soul, and its meaning. Protect them, value them, and hold them like treasures beyond measure. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right. I am with Mr. Peter." The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Pamela Anderson watched her world crumble in real time. She stood at the edge of the Sterling and Levi Enterprises grand ballroom, clipboard clutched against her navy dress, watching Jose Levi, the man who haunted her dreams and made her days a beautiful torture, announce his engagement to Elodie Rose Pemberton. The society crowd erupted in polite applause, but Pamela heard nothing except the thundering of her own heartbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jose's deep voice carried across the room, that familiar hint of his Cuban accent making her stomach flutter despite everything. "Miss Pemberton and I are honored to combine our families' legacies." Pamela forced herself to smile, to nod, to play the perfect executive assistant she'd been for 3 years. But inside, she was dying. She'd known this engagement was coming, had typed the press releases herself, but seeing it happen, watching Jose's strong hands place that massive diamond on another woman's finger, felt like watching her heart get buried alive. Elodie was everything Pamela wasn't. Blonde, where Pamela was brunette. Elegant, where Pamela was practical. Born into wealth, where Pamela had clawed her way up from a Brooklyn apartment with 3 roommates. Most importantly, Elodie was the perfect business merger disguised as love. Pamela. The sound of her name in Jose's voice made her spine straighten. She turned to find him approaching, devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, those dark eyes unreadable as always. "I need you to handle the Nakamura crisis. The Tokyo deal is falling apart." Of course, while everyone else celebrated his engagement, she would be working, the story of her pathetic life. "Of course, Mr. Levi." She managed to keep her voice steady. "Should I set up the conference room?" "My office, 20 minutes." His gaze lingered on her face for just a moment longer than necessary. "And Pamela, thank you for staying." The way he said it, soft, almost vulnerable, made her chest tight. Before she could respond, Elodie appeared at his side like a perfectly groomed golden retriever, all smiles and designer perfume. "Darling, the mayor wants to discuss the foundation merger," Elodie purred, her hand possessive on Jose's arm. Her eyes flicked to Pamela with barely concealed disdain. "Surely your assistant can handle whatever crisis this is. It's our engagement party." Jose's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Business doesn't stop for parties, Elodie. You know this." Pamela watched the exchange with growing unease. She'd seen that look on Jose's face before, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the man beneath the ruthless CEO facade. The man who worked 18-hour days because sleep brought nightmares. The man who kept a photo of his dead mother hidden in his desk drawer. The man she'd fallen hopelessly in love with. "I'll be upstairs in 15 minutes, Pamela said quietly, then melted into the crowd before either of them could respond. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt eternal. The party noise faded as she rose higher into Jose's domain, the executive level that housed his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. She'd spent countless hours in that office, taking dictation, managing his impossible schedule, pretending her heart didn't race every time he came close enough for her to smell his cologne. The hallway was eerily quiet, lit only by security lighting. Pamela's heels clicked against the marble as she made her way to José's office, her mind already shifting into crisis management mode. The Nakamura deal was worth 200 million. Losing it would be catastrophic. She was setting up her laptop when José burst through the door, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "The bastards are threatening to pull out completely," he said without preamble, stripping off his tuxedo jacket and rolling up his sleeves. 3 years of negotiations down the drain because some junior executive in their Tokyo office got cold feet about our South American expansion. Pamela pulled up the files, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "What if we offer the modified payment structure, the one we discussed last month but decided against?" José paused in his pacing, those dark eyes focusing on her with laser intensity. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about our work together." The words slipped out before she could stop them, loaded with more meaning than she intended. The air in the room shifted, became charged with the electricity that always crackled between them, but which they both pretended didn't exist. José moved closer, leaning over her shoulder to read the screen, and Pamela's breath caught. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the slight stubble on his jaw that appeared by evening. "You're brilliant," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "How did I get so lucky to have you as my assistant?" Pamela's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory, the kind of moment that led to HR violations and broken hearts. But when she looked up and met his gaze, she saw something in his eyes that made her forget every professional boundary she'd ever set. "José," she whispered, and his name on her lips seemed to break something in him. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "We shouldn't," he said, but he was already leaning closer. "I know," she breathed, but she was tilting her face up toward his. The first touch of his lips was soft, questioning, but when she responded, when she melted into him with a soft sigh, the kiss deepened into something desperate and consuming. 3 years of suppressed longing exploded between them as his arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. "Pamela," he groaned against her mouth, and she could taste her name on his lips like a prayer. They stumbled backward until her spine hit the wall, his body caging her in as his hands tangled in her carefully styled hair. This was madness, kissing her boss in his office while his fiancé waited downstairs. But Pamela couldn't bring herself to care, not when José was kissing her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Thunder crashed outside and lightning illuminated the office in stark white. The storm that had been threatening all evening had finally broken, rain lashing against the windows. It felt symbolic somehow, all the careful control they'd maintained finally shattering like the calm before the storm. José's mouth moved to her neck, pressing hot kisses along the sensitive skin there, and Pamela's knees nearly buckled, her hands fisted in his shirt, holding on for dear life as sensation overwhelmed her. "I've wanted this for so long," he confessed against her throat, his voice raw with need. "Every day, watching you, wanting you, knowing I can't have you." "You can have me," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "José, you can have everything." For a moment, the world stood still. José pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. His hand came up to trace the line of her jaw, touch reverent and tender. "Mi amor," he whispered in Spanish, the endearment falling from his lips like a caress. But then another crash of thunder seemed to shake him back to reality. Jose stepped back abruptly, running a hand through his disheveled hair, his expression shifting from tender to horrified. "This can't happen," he said, his voice turning cold. "This was a mistake." The words hit Pamela like a physical blow. She watched in stunned silence as Jose straightened his shirt, picked up his discarded jacket, and rebuilt the walls between them with ruthless efficiency. "Mr. Levi," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "It never happened," he said, not looking at her. "Do you understand me, Miss Anderson? This never happened, and if you value your job, you'll forget every second of it." The transformation was complete. The passionate man who had whispered endearments against her skin was gone, replaced by the cold CEO who ruled his empire with an iron fist. Pamela straightened her dress with shaking hands, trying to salvage what remained of her dignity. "Of course, sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Jose finally looked at her then, and for just a moment she saw anguish in his dark eyes. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. "Fix the Nakamura deal," he said curtly. "I want a solution on my desk by morning." With that, he strode from the office, leaving Pamela alone with the ghost of his touch and the bitter taste of rejection. She sank into his desk chair, her legs too shaky to support her, and stared out at the storm raging beyond the windows. 3 weeks later, when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, Pamela would remember this moment. The way the lightning had illuminated Jose's face as he kissed her, the way he'd called her mi amor like she was something precious. She would remember, and she would know with absolute certainty that she could never, ever tell him about the baby growing inside her. Because some mistakes, once made, could destroy everything. Chapter 2. Building the Escape. The 2 pink lines staring back at Pamela from the pregnancy test felt like a death sentence wrapped in a miracle. She sat on the cold bathroom floor of her studio apartment, legs trembling, holding the plastic stick that had just changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since that night in Jose's office. 3 weeks of him treating her like a stranger, of cold professionalism that cut deeper than any blade. And now this. "No, no, no," she whispered, but the lines didn't disappear. If anything, they seemed to mock her with their bold certainty. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Soraya. "Dinner tonight? You've been avoiding my calls." Pamela couldn't face anyone right now, especially not Soraya with her knowing eyes and ability to read her like an open book. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to survive what was coming, because telling Jose was not an option. She'd learned that harsh truth 2 days ago, when she'd accidentally discovered the file hidden deep in the company archives. Catalina Morales, a young woman who had been Jose's assistant 5 years earlier. The same woman who had broken his heart so completely that he'd become the ruthless, emotionally distant man she knew today. Pamela had been researching employee benefit packages when she'd stumbled across Catalina's personnel file, marked with a red flag for legal complications. The attached documents painted a devastating picture. A young woman who had claimed to be pregnant with Jose's child, only to disappear one night with $50,000 from the company's emergency fund. She'd been found 3 days later, dead in a car accident while fleeing the state. But the most damning piece was Jose's handwritten note, filed with HR. "No employee will ever again be permitted to claim personal complications as grounds for special treatment or financial support. Any suggestion of inappropriate relationships will result in immediate termination." The policy was still in effect, still buried in the employee handbook under professional conduct guidelines. Still the reason why Jose would destroy her the moment he learned about her pregnancy. He would think she was just another Catalina trying to trap him with a baby that might not even be his. The irony was suffocating. Pamela had fallen in love with a man whose heart was so thoroughly armored against women like her that he'd made it company policy to destroy them. Her phone rang, jolting her from her spiral. Jose's name flashed on the screen, and her stomach clenched with familiar longing and dread. "Mr. Levi's office," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Conference room, now." His tone was arctic. "The Pemberton wedding planning meeting has been moved up." Of course it had, because apparently the universe wasn't done torturing her yet. Pamela dressed carefully in a loose-fitting blazer and made her way to the 20th floor conference room, where Elodie Pemberton held court like a queen planning her coronation. The woman was perfection incarnate, blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, designer suit that probably cost more than Pamela's monthly rent, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating blue eyes. "Pamela, darling," Elodie purred as she entered. "How lovely that you could join us. I specifically requested you for this meeting." Jose sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed documents. He hadn't looked at her once since that night 3 weeks ago. Not really looked at her. It was as if he'd erased her from his consciousness entirely. "I've decided on an August wedding," Elodie continued, spreading fabric samples across the mahogany table. "Something grand and timeless. After all, this union represents the merger of two of the city's most prominent families." Pamela dutifully took notes, fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness and everything to do with watching the woman who would soon be Jose's wife plan their future together. "The guest list will be quite extensive," Elodie was saying. 500 of our closest friends and business associates. I'll need you to coordinate with my wedding planner, of course. Someone in your position couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of such an event." The dismissal stung, but Pamela kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with worse condescension from clients over the years. "I'll also need a complete background check on all staff who will be working the event," Elodie added casually. "We can't have any complications interfering with our special day." Something in her tone made Pamela look up sharply. Elodie was watching her with an expression that looked almost predatory, as if she knew something that Pamela didn't realize she'd revealed. "Is there a problem, Miss Anderson?" Jose's voice cut through her thoughts, and she realized she'd stopped writing. "No, sir. Just making sure I capture all the details accurately." For the first time in 3 weeks, their eyes met across the table. The impact was immediate and devastating, all the heat and longing from that night rushing back like a tidal wave. Jose's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Pamela saw her own pain reflected in his dark eyes before he looked away. "Perhaps Miss Anderson would benefit from a change of scenery," Elodie suggested smoothly. "Didn't you mention that the London office was looking for experienced staff? Someone with her background might find it refreshing to start over somewhere new." Pamela's blood ran cold. Was Elodie somehow aware of what had happened between her and Jose? Or was this just convenient cruelty? "The London transfer program requires a 6-month application process," Jose said carefully. "It's not something that can be arranged overnight." "Oh, but surely for the right candidate, exceptions could be made." Elodie's smile was razor-sharp. "After all, you are the CEO, and I'm sure Miss Anderson is eager for new opportunities. Aren't you, dear?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Pamela could feel Jose's attention focused on her with laser intensity, could sense him waiting for her response. This was her chance, her escape route being handed to her on a silver platter. "I would be very interested in exploring international opportunities," she said quietly. Jose's face went completely blank. "I see. Well then, I suppose we should expedite the application process." The words felt like a knife to the heart, even though they were exactly what she needed to hear. Jose was letting her go, probably relieved to have an excuse to remove the complication she represented from his life. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of wedding details and passive-aggressive comments from Elodie. When it finally ended, Pamela gathered her notes and headed for the door, desperate to escape before she broke down completely. "Miss Anderson." Jose's voice stopped her at the threshold. "My office. 5 minutes." Her heart hammered as she made her way to the executive floor. Jose was already there when she arrived, standing with his back to her, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "Is this what you want?" he asked without turning around. "London?" "Yes, sir." The lie tasted like ash on her tongue. "Why?" The single word hung between them, loaded with more meaning than a simple question should carry. Pamela could tell him the truth, that she was pregnant with his child and needed to disappear before he destroyed her. She could confess that she loved him desperately and couldn't watch him marry another woman. She could beg him to fight for what they'd shared that night in the storm. Instead, she said, "I think it's time for a change." Jose finally turned to face her, and the emptiness in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. He looked like a man who had lost everything that mattered, even though he was gaining an empire through his marriage. "The transfer will take time to arrange properly," he said formally. 6 months minimum. Can you manage that long?" 6 months. 6 months to hide her pregnancy, save money, and plan her escape. 6 months of watching him prepare to marry another woman while their baby grew inside her. "Yes, sir, I can manage." Jose nodded curtly. "Very well. I'll have Daphne Richardson begin the paperwork tomorrow." Daphne, his new assistant, hired to eventually replace Pamela, a sharp, ambitious woman who watched everything with calculating eyes and smiled like a shark, sensing blood in the water. "Is there anything else, Mr. Levi?" For a moment, Jose's mask slipped, and she saw the man who had called her mi amor in the darkness. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold CEO who ruled his empire with an iron fist. "No, Miss Anderson. That will be all." Pamela nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her one last time. "Pamela." Her name on his lips was soft, almost broken. I hope you find what you're looking for in London." She didn't trust herself to speak, so she simply nodded and walked away, leaving behind the only man she'd ever loved and the future she'd never have. Chapter 3. Dangerous Games. The camera's telephoto lens captured every detail as Pamela Anderson emerged from Dr. Aviora Sinclair's prenatal clinic, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach. From across the street, Darius Kane lowered his camera and smiled. 3 months of surveillance, and finally he had something worth reporting to his client. The woman was pregnant, no doubt about it. The question was whether this little piece of information would be enough to satisfy Aurelia Blackwood's obsession with destroying any woman who got too close to Jose Levi. Darius had been following Pamela for weeks now, documenting her routine, her habits, her secrets. It was easy work. The woman was so focused on hiding her pregnancy that she never noticed the investigator trailing her. Medical appointments disguised as lunch meetings, prenatal vitamins hidden in generic vitamin bottles, loose clothing that grew progressively more strategic each week. But what made this case particularly interesting was the timing. Based on his surveillance reports, Pamela's pregnancy coincided perfectly with the charity gala where Jose Levi had announced his engagement. Whatever had happened that night, it had changed everything. Inside her tiny studio apartment, Pamela was unaware that her most private moments were being catalogued and photographed. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with a mixture of wonder and terror. At 3 months, her bump was still small enough to hide, but each day brought new changes that made her secret harder to keep. The nausea had finally begun to subside, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. But she pushed through it, maintaining her perfect professional facade while drowning in the emotional turmoil of watching Jose prepare for his wedding. Her phone buzzed with a text from Soraya. "You're avoiding me again. I'm coming over with Thai food whether you like it or not." Panic fluttered in Pamela's chest. She wasn't ready to tell anyone about the pregnancy yet, especially not her fiercely protective sister, who would demand to know the father's identity and probably march into Jose's office to confront him personally. 20 minutes later, Soraya Cruz arrived with enough takeout to feed a small army, and the determined expression that had gotten her through law school while working 2 jobs. She was everything Pamela wished she could be: confident, assertive, unafraid to demand what she deserved from the world. "You look terrible," Soraya announced, settling onto the couch and unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry. "And don't tell me it's work stress. I know work stress, and this is something else entirely." Pamela forced herself to eat, fighting her still sensitive stomach. "I'm fine, Sor. Just tired." "Bullshit." Soraya studied her with laser focus. "You've been weird for months, secretive, emotional, and now you look like you haven't slept in weeks. What's going on?" The urge to confess everything was almost overwhelming. To tell Soraya about Jose, about that night in his office, about the baby growing inside her, and the impossible situation she found herself in. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she had a plan. "The London transfer is going through," she said instead. "I'll be moving to the UK office within 6 months." Soraya's fork clattered against her plate. "London?" "Pamela, what the hell? You've never mentioned wanting to work internationally. You love New York. Your whole life is here." "Maybe that's the problem," Pamela said carefully. "Maybe I need a fresh start." "This is about him, isn't it?" Soraya's voice turned sharp. "Your mysterious boss that you've been pining over for 3 years. Did something happen?" The question hit too close to home, and Pamela felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "Sor, please, can we not do this tonight?" But Soraya was relentless when she sensed vulnerability. "He's getting married, isn't he? To that Ice Queen socialite I've seen in the society pages, and you're running away because you can't handle watching it happen." Tears threatened, but Pamela blinked them back. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," Soraya demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're letting some emotionally unavailable man drive you away from everything you've worked for. That's not the Pamela I know." Before Pamela could respond, her work phone rang. Jose's name flashed on the screen, and her heart immediately began racing. "I have to take this," she said, stepping into the bedroom. "Sterling and Levi Enterprises, Pamela Anderson speaking. I need you to come in." Jose's voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. "There's been a development with the Blackwood situation." Aurelia Blackwood, Jose's ex-fiancée, the woman who had been publicly humiliated when he'd chosen the arranged marriage to Elodie over their relationship. Pamela had heard whispers about Aurelia's increasingly erratic behavior since the engagement announcement, but Jose had always dismissed it as harmless attention-seeking. "What kind of development, sir?" "The kind that requires immediate damage control. How quickly can you get here?" Pamela glanced at the clock. "Nearly 8 p.m. on a Friday night. I can be there in 30 minutes. Make it 20. The line went dead, leaving Pamela staring at her phone with growing dread. In the 3 months since Jose's engagement, she'd noticed increased security around the building, mysterious phone calls that left him agitated, and a general atmosphere of tension that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I have to go," she told Soraya, grabbing her purse and jacket. "At 8 o'clock on a Friday. Pamela, this is insane. No job is worth—" "It's important." Pamela was already heading for the door. "We'll finish this conversation later, I promise." But she knew they wouldn't. In 6 months, she would be gone, and Soraya would eventually understand that some secrets were too dangerous to share. The Sterling and Levi building was eerily quiet on a Friday evening, with only security guards and a handful of ambitious executives burning the midnight oil. Pamela's heels echoed in the empty marble lobby as she made her way to the executive elevator, her stomach churning with a combination of pregnancy hormones and mounting anxiety. Jose's office was dark except for the desk lamp that cast harsh shadows across his face. He looked older than his 34 years, stress lines etched deep around his eyes. When she entered, he was studying a manila envelope with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. "Sir?" she said softly. Jose looked up, and for a moment, she saw past his professional mask to the exhausted, frustrated man beneath. "Sit down, Pamela. We need to discuss your future with this company." The words sent ice through her veins. Did he know? Had he somehow discovered her pregnancy? She lowered herself carefully into the chair across from his desk, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "3 months ago, you expressed interest in the London transfer," Jose continued. "I've been working to expedite that process." Relief flooded through her. This was about London, not about the secret growing inside her. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your efforts." Jose slid the manila envelope across the desk. "Your transfer has been approved. You'll be leaving for London in 3 months instead of 6. 3 months! Pamela's heart raced as she calculated dates. She would be 6 months pregnant by then, visibly showing, impossible to hide. But maybe that was for the best. By the time her pregnancy became obvious, she would be an ocean away from Jose and his devastating brown eyes. "That's wonderful news," she managed. "There's more." Jose's voice was carefully controlled. "Aurelia Blackwood has been making inquiries about you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "About me? Why?" "That's what I intend to find out." Jose's jaw clenched. "She's hired a private investigator to follow you, Pamela. I don't know what she's looking for, but I won't have my employees harassed by a woman who can't accept that our relationship is over." Pamela's mouth went dry. A private investigator. Following her. Photographing her visits to the clinic, documenting her pregnancy symptoms, building a case that could destroy everything. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "Why would she care about me?" Jose studied her face intently, and she prayed he couldn't see the guilt written there. "I think she believes there's something between us, something that threatens her chances of winning me back." The irony was suffocating. Aurelia was right. There was something between them, something that would destroy Jose's engagement, his reputation, his carefully constructed life, if it ever came to light. "What do you want me to do?" Pamela asked. "Be careful," Jose said quietly. "Vary your routes home. Watch for anyone following you. And if Aurelia approaches you directly, I want to know immediately." Pamela nodded, though she knew it was probably too late. If Aurelia's investigator was any good, he already had enough evidence to piece together the truth. "There's something else," Jose continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Something I need you to understand before you leave for London." He stood and moved to the window, his back to her, as he spoke. "That night, 3 months ago, I need you to know that it wasn't nothing to me. What happened between us?" Pamela's breath caught in her throat. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that could shatter both their worlds. "Mr. Levi." "Let me finish," he said, still not turning around. "I've made choices, commitments that I can't undo. My engagement to Elodie serves purposes beyond personal happiness. But if circumstances were different, if I were free to choose—" He trailed off, leaving the words hanging in the air like a promise and a heartbreak combined. "I understand," Pamela whispered, though she wasn't sure she understood anything anymore. Jose finally turned to face her, and the raw longing in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. "I hope London gives you everything you're looking for, Pamela. You deserve happiness." If only he knew that everything she wanted was standing right in front of her, forbidden and impossible and perfect. That the happiness he wished for her was growing inside her. a piece of him she would carry forever, even as she walked away. "Thank you, sir," she said, standing on unsteady legs, "for everything." As she reached the door, Jose's voice stopped her one last time. "Pamela, be safe. Whatever Aurelia is planning, I won't let her hurt you." The promise wrapped around her heart like a shield, even as she knew that the person most likely to hurt her was Jose himself, the moment he discovered what she was hiding. Chapter 4. The countdown begins. The flowing navy blazer was a masterpiece of strategic dressing, but even Pamela's most creative wardrobe solutions couldn't hide the truth forever. At 4 months pregnant, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, studying the subtle curve of her belly with a mixture of awe and terror. The baby was growing stronger each day. She could feel the flutter of tiny movements, especially in the quiet moments when she wasn't focused on maintaining her elaborate charade. In just 8 weeks, she would be on a plane to London, and this beautiful secret would finally be safe from discovery. 8 weeks. She just had to survive 8 more weeks. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: wedding dress fitting, Elodie Pemberton, 10 a.m. Pamela closed her eyes and took a steadying breath. Today would be particularly challenging, watching Jose's fiancé prepare for the wedding that would seal Pamela's fate forever. The Sterling and Levi building hummed with its usual morning energy as Pamela made her way to the 20th floor conference room where Elodie held court. She'd learned to time her arrivals carefully, slipping in through side doors and avoiding the main elevators where Jose might appear unexpectedly. Every encounter with him was a test of her carefully constructed composure, and she couldn't afford to fail. Elodie stood on a small platform in the center of the room, draped in ivory silk that probably cost more than Pamela's annual salary. The wedding dress was stunning, a masterpiece of couture that transformed the already beautiful woman into something ethereal and untouchable. "Pamela, perfect timing," Elodie called out, her voice honey-sweet with an underlying edge of steel. "I need you to coordinate with the photographer for the engagement shoot next week." "Of course, Miss Pemberton." Pamela pulled out her tablet, grateful for something to focus on besides the painful reminder of what she would never have. "And I've decided on Tuscany for the honeymoon," Elodie continued, turning gracefully as the seamstress adjusted her hemline. 3 weeks in a private villa. Jose mentioned he's never been to Italy, can you believe that? A man of his sophistication, never experiencing the romance of Tuscany. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to remind Pamela of everything she didn't know about Jose, everything she would never share with him. Pamela kept her expression neutral as she made notes, though her heart clenched with each detail of their planned future together. "He works too much, you know," Elodie said casually. "All those late nights at the office, all that stress. A wife's job is to help him find balance, to give him reasons to come home." The barb hit its mark. Pamela had been the one working those late nights with Jose, the one who knew exactly how much pressure he carried, how the weight of responsibility sometimes made him seem older than his years. But she would never be the one to give him comfort, to ease his burdens, to be his reason for coming home. "I'm sure he's fortunate to have your support," Pamela managed. Elodie smiled in the mirror, and there was something almost predatory in her expression. Some women make the mistake of thinking they understand complex men like Jose. They confuse professional necessity with personal connection. It's quite sad, really. The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Did Elodie know? Was this elaborate wedding dress fitting just an excuse to deliver a warning? Before Pamela could respond, the conference room door opened and Jose walked in, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal grey suit. His presence immediately changed the energy in the room, commanding attention without effort. "Elodie, you wanted to discuss the guest list revision." His voice was professionally polite, but Pamela caught the slight tension around his eyes that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Darling, look at this dress," Elodie purred, spinning slowly on the platform. "Isn't it magnificent? Your bride will be the envy of every woman in New York." José's gaze swept over his fiancée with the kind of appreciation one might show a beautiful piece of art, admiring but distant. Then his eyes found Pamela across the room, and the careful indifference in his expression flickered for just a moment. "It's lovely," he said, though he was looking at Pamela when he spoke. The seamstress cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we could have some privacy for the final adjustments." "Of course," José said quickly, clearly relieved to have an excuse to leave. "Pamela, could I see you in my office? There are some London transition details we need to discuss." Pamela's heart hammered as she followed him from the room, acutely aware of Elodie's calculating gaze, tracking their departure. The elevator ride to the executive floor was torture, just the two of them in the enclosed space, the air thick with unspoken words and suppressed longing. "How are you feeling about the transfer?" José asked as they entered his office, his voice carefully neutral. "Excited," Pamela lied. "It's a wonderful opportunity." José moved to stand behind his desk, putting the massive piece of furniture between them like a barrier. "There's something I need to tell you about the London office, about why I've been pushing for this transfer to happen quickly." Pamela's blood ran cold. Did he know about the pregnancy? Had Aurelia's investigator somehow gotten evidence to him? "I've received some concerning reports about Aurelia's behavior," José continued. "She's been making threats, not just about me, but about people close to me, my staff, people she sees as obstacles to her delusion that will reconcile." Relief and terror warred in Pamela's chest. He was trying to protect her, but from a threat that was far more dangerous than he realized. "What kind of threats?" she asked. "Nothing specific enough for legal action, but enough to make me concerned for your safety." José's jaw tightened. "I won't have you caught in the crossfire of her obsession." The irony was suffocating. José was trying to save her from Aurelia while remaining completely unaware that Pamela was carrying the very weapon that could destroy them all. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Levi, but I can handle myself." "Can you?" José moved around the desk, approaching her with that focused intensity that always made her feel like she was the only person in his universe. "Because you've seemed different lately. Distant, tired. If there's something wrong, something I should know." He was standing close enough now that she could smell his cologne, could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes. For a moment, Pamela teetered on the edge of confession. It would be so easy to tell him the truth, to let him shoulder the burden of their shared secret. But then she remembered Catalina Morales and the policy that still existed in the employee handbook. She thought of Elodie downstairs in her wedding dress, of the merger that would save both families' empires, of the life José had carefully constructed that would crumble the moment he learned about the baby. "I'm fine," she whispered, "just nervous about the move." José studied her face intently, and she prayed he couldn't see through her lies. "If you ever need anything, Pamela, anything at all, you know you can come to me." The promise broke her heart because it was everything she wanted and nothing she could accept. "I know," she said. "Thank you." José nodded and stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. "Your replacement starts Monday, Daphne Richardson. I'd like you to train her personally." Daphne Richardson. Pamela had met her briefly during the interview process, a sharp, ambitious woman with calculating eyes and a smile that never seemed entirely genuine. The thought of leaving José in her care made Pamela's stomach clench with something that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. "Of course. I'll make sure she's fully prepared." "Good." José's voice was clipped, businesslike. "The London paperwork should be finalized by the end of next week. You'll be leaving sooner than we originally planned." Each word felt like a countdown to the end of everything she'd ever wanted, but it was also a countdown to freedom, to safety, to a life where she could raise their child without fear of discovery. "I understand," she said. As Pamela reached the door, Jose called her name one last time. She turned to find him silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly behind him. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm going to miss working with you." The admission hung between them like a bridge she could never cross. Pamela memorized the image of him standing there, powerful, lonely, and completely unaware that he was letting the best thing in his life walk away. Chapter 5. The Revelation Explosion. The manila envelope landed on Jose Levi's desk like a bomb waiting to detonate, and Aurelia Blackwood watched with predatory satisfaction as his world began to crumble. "I thought you should see these before you make any more mistakes," Aurelia purred, settling into the chair across from Jose's desk with the confidence of a woman who held all the cards. She was dressed impeccably as always, designer suit, perfect makeup, every blonde hair in place. But there was something manic in her blue eyes that made Jose's blood run cold. He stared at the envelope without touching it, every instinct screaming danger. "What is this, Aurelia?" "Open it and find out." Her smile was razor-sharp, "though I think you'll find the contents quite illuminating." Jose had been dealing with Aurelia's increasingly erratic behavior for months now. Mysterious phone calls, flowers sent to his office, public scenes at charity events where she accidentally appeared on his arm for photos. But this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. With deliberate calm, he opened the envelope and spread the contents across his desk. Photo after photo of Pamela Anderson taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Pamela leaving a medical building. Pamela at a pharmacy, prescription bottle in hand. Pamela in profile, her hand resting on what was unmistakably a pregnant belly. The world stopped spinning. Jose stared at the images, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Pamela, pregnant, 5 months along judging by the photos. 5 months that correlated exactly with the charity gala, Aurelia said, her voice like silk over steel. "Remember that night, Jose, when you abandoned our future for a business arrangement with the Pemberton family? When you thought you could just dismiss what we had together?" Jose's hands trembled as he picked up one of the photos, a clear profile shot that showed Pamela's rounded belly beneath a flowing dress. The image was time-stamped from 3 days ago. She was unmistakably, undeniably pregnant, with his child. "You hired someone to follow her," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I hired someone to protect my interests," Aurelia corrected. "And what do you think, darling? Does little Miss Perfect look like someone you can trust? Someone who respects the boundaries of professional relationships?" The rage that swept through Jose was incandescent. Not at Pamela, never at Pamela, but at Aurelia for violating her privacy, for turning something beautiful into a weapon of destruction. "Get out!" he growled. "Oh, I don't think so." Aurelia leaned back in her chair, completely unmoved by his fury. "You see, I've been very patient with this little charade of yours. Your engagement to that vapid Pemberton girl, your pretense that we don't belong together, but I won't be replaced by some scheming secretary who thinks she can trap you with a pregnancy." "I said get out." Jose stood slowly, his control hanging by a thread. "Just like Catalina, isn't she?" Aurelia's voice turned vicious. "Another conniving little nobody who thought she could use your weakness against you. At least Catalina had the decency to disappear before causing a public scandal." The mention of Catalina was the final straw. Jose moved around the desk with predatory grace, and for a moment Aurelia's confidence flickered. "If you ever mention Catalina's name again," he said softly, If you ever come near Pamela again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will destroy you so completely that your own mother won't recognize what's left." Aurelia's mask slipped entirely, revealing the desperate, unhinged woman beneath the polished exterior. "You can't threaten me, Jose. Not when I hold all the cards. One phone call to the tabloids, and your precious reputation is finished. Your engagement, your business deals, everything you've built, gone." "Then make the call," Jose said quietly. "But understand that if you do, you'll have declared war on the wrong man." For a moment, they stared at each other across a chasm of mutual destruction. Then Aurelia gathered the photos with shaking hands, her composure cracking like ice. "You have 24 hours to end this pregnancy scandal quietly," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. "Marry me like you should have years ago, and I'll make this all go away. Choose her, and I'll make sure the whole world knows what kind of man Jose Levi really is." She swept from the office like an avenging angel, leaving Jose alone with the echo of her threats and the devastating truth spread across his desk in black and white photographs. Pamela was pregnant, with his child, and she hadn't told him. The betrayal cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong, any corporate sabotage he'd ever faced. For 5 months, she'd looked him in the eye every day and lied. While he'd agonized over their night together, while he'd fought his growing feelings for her, while he'd tried to protect her from Aurelia's machinations, she'd been carrying his child and planning to disappear to London without a word. Jose sank into his chair, the photos scattered before him like evidence of his own blindness. How had he not seen it? The loose clothing, the fatigue, the way she'd been avoiding him lately. All the signs had been there, and he'd been too consumed with his own guilt and longing to notice. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Levi, Miss Anderson is here for the quarterly review meeting." Perfect. His hands clenched into fists as he gathered the photos and slid them back into the envelope. "Send her in." Pamela entered his office with the professional composure she'd perfected over 3 years, but Jose could see past it now, could see the careful way she positioned herself behind the chair instead of sitting, the strategic drape of her blazer, the subtle glow that he'd attributed to the overhead lighting. The cramped seat on the overnight flight to London felt like a lifeboat carrying Pamela Anderson away from the wreckage of her former life. She pressed her face against the small window, watching Manhattan's glittering lights fade into darkness below. Each mile that passed between her and Jose Levi should have brought relief, but instead it felt like her heart was being stretched to its breaking point. The baby seemed to sense her distress, moving restlessly within her swollen belly, as if protesting their sudden flight from everything familiar. 6 months pregnant now, Pamela could no longer hide her condition behind flowing blazers and strategic positioning. The airline had been accommodating when she'd called that morning, desperate to escape before Jose could follow through on his threats to keep her from leaving. Her emergency ticket had cost nearly everything she'd saved for her new life, but freedom was worth any price. The memory of their confrontation 3 days ago still felt like an open wound. The look in Jose's eyes when he'd called her a liar and a thief, that cold, empty expression that had replaced the warmth she'd fallen in love with. She'd replayed those terrible moments 1,000 times, wondering if she could have said something different, explained her fear in a way that might have reached the man behind the anger. But it was too late for regrets now. Pamela shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her rounded belly. "We're going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "We're going to build a beautiful life in London, just the two of us." The words felt hollow, but she forced herself to believe them. She had to believe them, because the alternative, admitting that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, was too painful to consider. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Jose Levi stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, staring out at the city that had once seemed like his kingdom and now felt like his prison. The building was empty except for security guards and the cleaning crew, But he couldn't bring himself to go home to his cold, sterile apartment where every surface reminded him of the life he'd built around emotional emptiness. 3 days since Pamela had walked out of his office in tears. 3 days since he'd discovered that the woman he loved was carrying his child and planning to disappear forever. 3 days of Aurelia's increasingly unhinged phone calls demanding that he honor their agreement and announce their engagement. "Sir?" Daphne Richardson's voice cut through his brooding. His new assistant had been working late, ostensibly to familiarize herself with Pamela's old files, but Jose suspected she was more interested in impressing him with her dedication. "I've confirmed that Miss Anderson boarded the London flight this morning. She's officially transferred to the international office as planned." The words hit him like a physical blow. She was really gone. Pamela and his child were an ocean away, and he had no legal right to bring them back. No moral right either, considering how cruelly he'd treated her in those final moments. "Thank you, Daphne. That will be all." But Daphne lingered in the doorway, her expression calculating. "If I may say so, sir, it's probably for the best. The situation was becoming complicated." Jose turned to face her, noting the predatory gleam in her eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of Aurelia. "Meaning?" "Well, workplace relationships rarely end well, do they? And with Miss Anderson's condition, it could have become quite scandalous. You're well rid of the complication." The casual dismissal of Pamela and their child as a complication made Jose's blood run cold. This was how the world would see it, how his board of directors, his business partners, his fiancée would all see it. A sordid affair with an employee who had tried to trap him with an unwanted pregnancy. But it wasn't unwanted. The realization hit him with startling clarity. Despite everything, the deception, the timing, the impossible circumstances, he wanted that baby with a fierce protectiveness that surprised him. Wanted Pamela back in his life, in his arms, in his bed where she belonged. "Sir?" Daphne was still waiting for his response. "I said that will be all," Jose replied curtly, turning back to the window. When Daphne finally left, Jose pulled out his phone and stared at Pamela's contact information. He'd typed and deleted a dozen messages over the past 3 days, each attempt to reach out feeling more inadequate than the last. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry for calling her a thief? That he understood why she'd hidden the pregnancy? That he missed her so desperately it felt like drowning? Before he could lose his courage, he typed a simple message, "Are you safe?" He stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted them without sending. She probably never wanted to hear from him again, and he couldn't blame her. In London, Pamela was experiencing her first morning in a city that felt both exciting and impossibly foreign. Her temporary apartment near the Sterling and Levi International office was tiny, but charming, with a view of a small park where she could already imagine taking her daughter for walks when she was old enough. The UK office was a world away from the Manhattan headquarters, smaller, more intimate, with colleagues who seemed genuinely pleased to welcome her. Her new supervisor, Margaret Thornbury, was a sharp but kind woman in her 50s who had immediately put Pamela at ease. "We're absolutely delighted to have you," Margaret said, settling into the chair across from Pamela's new desk. "Your reputation preceded you. Mr. Levi spoke very highly of your skills when he recommended you for this position." Pamela's heart clenched at the mention of Jose, but she managed a professional smile. "I'm excited to be here. The international markets are fascinating." "Indeed they are, and I must say, you're handling the transition remarkably well, especially considering your condition." Margaret's eyes drifted meaningfully to Pamela's belly. "I assume you've discussed maternity leave arrangements?" The question caught Pamela off guard. In all her planning to escape New York, she hadn't thought much beyond getting safely to London. The reality of being a single mother in a foreign country suddenly felt overwhelming. Yes, of course. I'll need to review the company policies. Margaret's expression softened with maternal concern. Forgive me if this is presumptuous, but is the father not in the picture? Pamela felt tears threaten at the innocent question. How could she explain that the father was her former boss, a man engaged to someone else, who now believed she was a liar and a thief? It's complicated, she managed. It always is, dear. Margaret's voice was gentle. But you're not alone here. We take care of our own at this office, and that includes making sure new mothers have all the support they need. The kindness in her voice nearly broke Pamela's composure. For the first time since fleeing New York, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. But that afternoon, as she was settling into her new routine, her phone rang with a call from Soraya. Her sister had been trying to reach her for days, and Pamela knew she couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. London? Soraya's voice was a mixture of disbelief and fury. You moved to fucking London without telling me. Pamela, what the hell is going on? I got a promotion, Pamela said weakly, sinking into her desk chair. An international opportunity I couldn't pass up. Bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. Soraya's legal training made her excellent at detecting lies. People don't flee to other continents for promotions. They flee from scandals, from heartbreak, from... Oh my God. The silence stretched between them, loaded with understanding. You're pregnant, Soraya whispered. That's why you've been so weird lately. That's why you're running. Who's the father, Pamela? Pamela closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed deception crumbling. Sor, please, it's him, isn't it? Your boss, the one you've been in love with for 3 years. Soraya's voice turned deadly quiet. That bastard got you pregnant and now he's trying to cover it up by shipping you off to London. It's not like that, Pamela protested, though she wasn't sure what it was like anymore. The hell it isn't. I'm getting on the next plane to London, and then I'm flying back to New York to castrate that son of a bitch with a rusty spoon. Soraya, no, panic flooded Pamela's voice. You can't. Please, it's complicated. Complicated how? Either he takes responsibility for his child, or I make him take responsibility. Those are his options. Pamela could picture her sister's face, the same expression she'd worn when threatening childhood bullies or incompetent opposing counsel. Soraya was magnificent in her fury, but she was also dangerous. He doesn't want us, Pamela said quietly, the admission tearing at her heart. He made that very clear, so please, just let it go. Let me handle this my way. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Pamela wondered if the call had dropped. When Soraya finally spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. Oh, honey, what did he do to you? That night, as Pamela lay in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of London traffic, she pressed her hand to her belly and tried to imagine a future where this pain would fade, where she could look at her daughter without seeing José's dark eyes, without remembering the way he'd whispered, mi amor, in the darkness. Somewhere, she hoped, there was a life waiting for them that didn't revolve around the man who had broken her heart so completely that she'd fled to another continent to escape the pieces. Chapter 7. The Unraveling Truth. The tiny newborn's cry pierced through the sterile quiet of the London hospital room, and Pamela Anderson felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself in the space of a single breath. She's perfect, whispered Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore, the elderly neighbour who had become Pamela's chosen family over the past 3 months. At 78, Adelaide had seen enough of life to recognise a woman in need of mothering, and she'd appointed herself Pamela's guardian angel without being asked. Pamela cradled her daughter against her chest, marvelling at the perfect tiny features that were unmistakably José's, the dark hair, the determined set of her miniature jaw, the way her little fist curled, as if she was already prepared to fight the world. "Hello, my beautiful girl," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama." "Have you chosen a name?" asked Dr. Miranda Pearson, the kind obstetrician who had guided Pamela through her pregnancy with gentle expertise. "Lumira Rose Anderson," Pamela said softly, testing the name that had come to her in a dream months ago. Lumira, light and peace combined. Rose for the flowers Jose had once mentioned his mother loved. Anderson because her daughter would carry her name, her strength, her unconditional love. "It's beautiful," Adelaide said, dabbing at her own tears. "She's going to be extraordinary, just like her mother." 3,000 miles away in Manhattan, Jose Levi was experiencing the collapse of everything he'd built his identity around. The Pemberton merger had failed spectacularly, with Victor Pemberton publicly withdrawing after months of Aurelia's poison campaign. His engagement to Elodie was over, ended by mutual agreement when both families realized the business foundations had crumbled beyond repair. "The Nakamura deal is gone too," Elias Sterling announced, dropping into the chair across from Jose's desk with exhausted resignation. They cited concerns about leadership stability in their withdrawal letter. Jose should have been devastated. These were billion-dollar deals, partnerships he'd spent years cultivating, the foundation of his business empire. Instead, all he felt was a strange sense of relief, as if weights he hadn't realized he was carrying were finally being lifted from his shoulders. "Good," he said simply, startling his best friend. "Good? Jose, we're talking about the systematic destruction of everything you've worked for." "We're talking about the systematic destruction of everything that was keeping me from what actually matters," Jose corrected. For months now, since Pamela had left, he'd found it increasingly difficult to care about profit margins and market dominance. Every success felt hollow when he had no one to share it with, every victory meaningless when it came at the cost of his own soul. "This is about her, isn't it?" Elias said quietly. "Pamela." Just hearing her name spoken aloud made Jose's chest tighten with longing and regret. "She's having my baby, Elias. Probably already has for all I know. And I'm sitting here in this office playing corporate games with people who would destroy me for sport, while the woman I love is raising our child on another continent." "Your alleged child," Elias said carefully. "Jose, I know you cared about her, but those photographs Aurelia showed you. We're part of a calculated campaign to destroy any chance I had at happiness," Jose interrupted. "I've been thinking about it for months, and the timeline, the timing of everything. Aurelia orchestrated it all." Elias leaned forward, his expression intense. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I was an idiot to believe anything that came from Aurelia Blackwood. I'm saying that the woman I accused of lying and stealing was probably protecting our child from exactly the kind of man I proved myself to be when I threw her out of my office." Before Elias could respond, Daphne Richardson appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Jose's blood run cold. His replacement assistant had been growing increasingly bold in her attempts to insinuate herself into his personal business, and the predatory gleam in her eyes suggested she had information she thought would be valuable. "Mr. Levi," she said, settling into the chair beside Elias without invitation. "I thought you should know that I've been monitoring the London office communications, and there's been some interesting developments regarding your former assistant." "What kind of developments?" Jose asked, though every instinct was screaming that he didn't want to hear this. "Miss Anderson gave birth 3 days ago," Daphne announced with obvious satisfaction. "A healthy baby girl. I thought you'd want to know given the circumstances." The words hit Jose like a physical blow. His daughter had been born. His child was in the world, taking her first breaths, beginning her life, and he had missed it all because of his own blindness and cruelty. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said get out. Clean out your desk and leave. You're fired." Daphne's confident mask slipped. "You can't fire me for providing information you needed to hear. I can fire you for violating employee privacy, for overstepping professional boundaries, and for being the kind of person who takes pleasure in other people's pain," Jose said, his voice deadly calm. "Security will escort you out within the hour." After Daphne left in a huff of indignation, Jose and Elias sat in heavy silence. Finally, Elias spoke. "You need to go to London. She won't want to see me. I called her a liar and a thief, Elias. I accused her of trying to trap me like—" Jose stopped. The comparison to Catalina dying on his lips as a terrible thought occurred to him. "Like Catalina supposedly did," Elias finished quietly. "Jose, there's something I need to tell you about that, something I should have investigated years ago." Jose looked up sharply. "What about Catalina?" Elias pulled out a thick manila folder, his expression grim. "I hired an investigator to look into Aurelia's claims about you and Pamela. What he found, it changes everything. About Pamela, about Aurelia, and about Catalina. Just tell me." "Aurelia orchestrated everything with Pamela, the surveillance, the photos, the timing. But more than that, she's been systematically destroying your business relationships for months. Every deal that's fallen through, every partnership that's dissolved, it all traces back to her campaign of lies." Jose felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. "And Catalina?" "Catalina never stole that money. Aurelia did, and she framed her for it. The woman you loved, who you thought betrayed you. She was fleeing because she'd discovered Aurelia's embezzlement, and Aurelia threatened to destroy her, and you, if she didn't disappear." The world tilted sideways. Jose gripped the arms of his chair, his vision blurring with the magnitude of what Elias was telling him. "There's more." Elias pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Catalina left a letter with her sister before she died. She was planning to come back to you once she had proof of Aurelia's crimes. Her sister kept this for 5 years, hoping someday someone would give it to you." Jose took the letter with shaking hands, recognizing Catalina's careful handwriting. Inside was the truth he'd needed 5 years ago, a truth that reframed everything he thought he knew about love, betrayal, and the woman who had tried to protect him even as she died. "Mi amor." The letter began, and Jose's vision blurred with tears. "If you are reading this, then perhaps the truth has finally come to light. I never betrayed you, never stopped loving you, never wanted anything but to build a life with you, free from the poison that Aurelia Blackwood brought into our world." The letter detailed Aurelia's crimes, her threats, her obsession with Jose that had driven her to frame an innocent woman. Catalina had died believing that someday he would know the truth, would understand that her love had been real, and her sacrifice had been to protect him. "She loved you," Elias said quietly. "And if she could see you now, see how you've let the same woman's lies destroy your chance with Pamela, she'd probably want to shake some sense into you." Jose looked up from the letter, his face wet with tears. "It's too late. Pamela's had the baby. She's built a life without me. I have no right to disrupt that after what I put her through." "You have a daughter," Elias said firmly. "Even if Pamela can't forgive you, and I think you're underestimating her capacity for forgiveness. That little girl deserves to know her father. The real you, not the man Aurelia's manipulations created." Jose stood slowly, decision crystallizing with the clarity that had once made him a formidable businessman. "I need to go to London. I'll have the jet ready within the hour. And Elias? When I come back, if I come back, I want Aurelia Blackwood destroyed. Completely, utterly destroyed. I want her to lose everything she's ever cared about the way she tried to make me lose everything I care about." "It would be my pleasure," Elias said grimly. As Jose prepared for the flight that would determine the rest of his life, he thought about Catalina's letter and the second chance he'd been given to love without fear. This time, he wouldn't let anyone, least of all his own wounded pride, stand in the way of claiming the family that belonged to him. Chapter 8. The Siege of Redemption. The knock on Pamela Anderson's London flat door came at exactly 6 a.m., 1 week after she'd brought Lumira home from the hospital, and she knew without looking through the peephole who was standing in the hallway. Jose Levi had come for his daughter. Pamela clutched her silk robe closer to her body, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and something that felt dangerously like hope. She hadn't seen him in 4 months, not since that devastating confrontation in his office when he'd called her a liar and a thief. Now he was here, in London, probably armed with lawyers and court orders and all the power that unlimited wealth could buy. "I know you're there, Pamela," his voice said through the door, and the familiar sound of her name in his accent made her knees weak. "Please, I just want to talk." She leaned against the door, closing her eyes and trying to summon the strength to face him. In the nursery, Lumira was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world was about to change forever. The past 4 months had been the hardest of Pamela's life, but also the most healing. She'd built a life here, found peace, created a home for herself and her daughter that felt safe and warm and full of love. Now Jose was here to destroy it all. "There's nothing to talk about," she said through the door. "You made your feelings very clear in New York." "I was wrong," Jose said quietly. "About everything. Pamela, please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for." Despite every instinct screaming at her to protect herself and her daughter, Pamela found herself turning the locks. When she opened the door, the sight of Jose Levi nearly brought her to her knees. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of weeks without proper rest. But it was the expression on his face that broke her heart. Raw grief and desperate hope combined with something that looked like shame. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his dark eyes drinking in the sight of her. "Motherhood suits you." Pamela was acutely aware of her appearance. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, wearing nothing but a robe and nursing pajamas. She felt exposed, vulnerable, completely unprepared for this confrontation. "What do you want, Jose?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "To apologize," he said simply. "To beg your forgiveness. To meet my daughter, if you'll let me." The last part nearly broke her resolve. She could hear the longing in his voice, the pain of a father who had missed his child's birth and first days of life. But she couldn't afford to be weak. Not when Lumira's future was at stake. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this." She started to close the door, but Jose's hand shot out to stop it. Not forcefully, he would never force anything with her, but with enough pressure to keep it open. "Pamela, please. Just listen to what I have to say. After that, if you want me to leave and never come back, I will. I swear to you." Against her better judgment, she stepped aside and let him enter her flat. Jose moved slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid any sudden movement might spook her into fleeing again. His eyes took in every detail of her small but cozy home. The soft furniture, the photographs on the walls, the baby blankets folded neatly on the sofa. "It's beautiful," he said. "It looks like you." Pamela wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "You have 5 minutes. Say whatever you came to say." Jose turned to face her, and the pain in his expression was so raw that she had to look away. "I know about Aurelia," he said quietly. "About what she did to you, to us. About Catalina." Pamela's head snapped up. "What about Catalina?" "She never betrayed me," Jose said, his voice thick with emotion. "She never stole that money, never tried to trap me with a pregnancy. Aurelia framed her, threatened her, drove her away, just like she tried to do to you. Catalina died trying to protect me from a woman who was already planning to destroy any chance I had at happiness. The words hit Pamela like a physical blow. She sank onto the sofa, her legs suddenly unable to support her. That's impossible. I have proof, Jose said, pulling out a folder from his jacket. Legal documents, investigative reports, even a letter Catalina wrote before she died. She loved me, Pamela, just like you did, and I destroyed both relationships because I was too blinded by fear and pain to see the truth. Pamela stared at the folder as if it contained a bomb. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that your fear wasn't unfounded. The policy I created after Catalina's death, the way I treated you when I found out about the pregnancy, it was all based on lies, Aurelia's lies. Jose's voice broke slightly. I called you a liar and a thief when the real liar and thief was the woman I should have seen through years ago. From the nursery came the soft sound of Lumira stirring, and both parents froze. Jose's eyes went wide with longing and fear, and Pamela saw her own protective instincts warring with the desire to let him meet his daughter. Is she? Jose asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She's beautiful, Pamela said softly. Perfect. She has your eyes. Jose closed his eyes as if the words caused him physical pain. What's her name? Lumira Rose Anderson. Lumira, Jose repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It's beautiful. What does it mean? Light and peace, Pamela said. I hoped she might bring light into whatever darkness we'd created. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and missed opportunities. Finally, Jose spoke again. I don't expect your forgiveness, he said quietly. I don't deserve it. But Pamela, I need you to know that I love you. I've loved you for 3 years, and I was too much of a coward to admit it until I'd already lost you. Pamela felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. Love isn't enough, Jose. You hurt me in ways I'm not sure I can forgive. You made me feel like I was nothing, like our daughter was nothing more than an inconvenience to be dealt with. I know, Jose said, and the defeat in his voice was heartbreaking. I know, and I hate myself for it. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. What do you mean? Jose moved to the window, looking out at the London street below. I've rented a flat 2 blocks from here. I'm not going back to New York, Pamela, not without you and Lumira. Panic fluttered in Pamela's chest. You can't just uproot your life and move to London. You have a company to run, responsibilities. Elias can handle the company. He's been wanting more control for years anyway. Jose turned back to face her, and his expression was determined in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. As for my other responsibilities, there's only one that matters now. Being the father that Lumira deserves, and the man that you fell in love with before I let fear destroy everything good in my life. From the nursery, Lumira's cries grew more insistent, and Pamela automatically moved toward the sound. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Jose. I need to feed her, she said. Can I? Would you let me see her? Just for a moment. Pamela's heart clenched at the naked longing in his voice. Despite everything that had happened between them, Jose was Lumira's father. Their daughter deserved the chance to know the man who had given her those beautiful dark eyes and that determined little chin. Okay, she said softly, but just for a moment. The nursery was painted in soft pastels, with a rocking chair by the window and a mobile of stars hanging over the crib. Jose followed Pamela inside like a man entering a sacred space, his movements reverent and careful. Lumira was awake now, her tiny fists waving as she worked up to a proper cry. But when Jose appeared at the side of her crib, she seemed to quiet slightly, as if recognizing something familiar in his face. Dios mío, Jose breathed, his voice thick with wonder. She's perfect. Pamela watched him study their daughter with the same intensity he usually reserved for million-dollar deals, memorizing every tiny feature. When Lumira wrapped her miniature fingers around Jose's offered thumb, he made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She's so strong," he marveled. "She gets that from both of us," Pamela said quietly. Jose looked up at her then, tears streaming down his face without shame. "Thank you," he whispered, "for bringing her into the world safely, for taking care of her when I should have been here, for being the incredible mother I knew you would be." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke Pamela's resolve, but she forced herself to step back. "I need to feed her now." Jose nodded and reluctantly released Lumira's tiny hand. "Of course, I should go." But at the nursery door, he paused and looked back at them both. "Pamela, I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm going to spend every day proving that I'm worthy of being in Lumira's life. And if I'm very lucky, maybe someday I'll be worthy of being in yours again, too." After he left, Pamela sat in the rocking chair with Lumira at her breast, staring out at the London street where Jose Levi was apparently planning to rebuild his entire life. The man who had broken her heart had just apologized with a sincerity that felt real, had shown her evidence that reframed everything she thought she knew about their past, and had looked at their daughter with such pure love that it took her breath away. But trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired, and Pamela wasn't sure she had the strength to risk her heart again, even for the man she'd never stopped loving. Chapter 9. What Shocked the World. The BBC business correspondent had been expecting a routine interview about emerging markets when Jose Levi dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "Mr. Levi," Rebecca Morrison said, adjusting her notes as the cameras rolled live across Europe and streaming globally, "your company has been remarkably quiet about the failed Pemberton merger. Can you comment on rumors that personal issues affected the business deal?" Jose sat across from her in the London studio, impeccably dressed as always. But there was something different about him, something raw and honest that made even the cynical media veteran lean forward with interest. "Rebecca," Jose said, his voice steady but weighted with emotion, "I'm glad you asked that question, because there's something I need to say publicly, something I should have said months ago." In her flat 2 miles away, Pamela Anderson nearly dropped the cup of tea she was preparing. Jose was on television in London, and the look in his eyes suggested he was about to do something either very brave or very stupid. "You see," Jose continued, looking directly into the camera as if he was speaking to one person instead of millions, "the failure of the Pemberton merger had nothing to do with market conditions or business strategy. It failed because I refused to marry a woman I didn't love to save a deal that would have made me richer but not happier." Rebecca Morrison's eyebrows shot up. This was definitely not the corporate spin she'd been expecting. "That's quite an admission, Mr. Levi." "I'm not finished," Jose said quietly. "The personal issues you mentioned? They involve someone I wronged terribly, someone who deserved far better from me than she received." Pamela's heart began to race. Surely he wasn't going to. "8 months ago, I fell in love with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known," Jose said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Pamela Anderson worked as my executive assistant for 3 years, and during that time, she became the heart of everything good in my life. She was brilliant, compassionate, loyal, and she made me want to be a better man." "Mr. Levi," Rebecca interjected, clearly sensing this interview was spiraling far beyond business news, "are you sure you want to?" "One night, during a moment of weakness and overwhelming emotion, we crossed professional boundaries," Jose continued, ignoring the interruption. "It was the most beautiful mistake I've ever made because it gave me the greatest gift of my life." Pamela sank onto her sofa, baby Lumira sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching in stunned disbelief as Jose Levi destroyed his carefully constructed public image on live television. "Pamela became pregnant with my daughter," Jose said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. "And instead of celebrating this miracle, instead of supporting the woman I loved, I allowed fear and past trauma to turn me into someone I barely recognize. I accused her of deception. I said things that were cruel and unforgivable. I drove away the only woman I've ever loved and missed the birth of my beautiful daughter because I was too blind to see the truth." The studio was dead silent. Rebecca Morrison, a veteran of 20 years in broadcast journalism, looked like she'd forgotten how to speak. "Her name is Lumira Rose Anderson," Jose continued, tears now flowing freely down his face. "She's 1 month old, perfect in every way, and she deserves better than a father who let pride and fear keep him from claiming his family." Finally, Rebecca found her voice. "Mr. Levi, this is highly unusual. Are you certain you want to make such personal revelations on live television?" "I'm certain," Jose said firmly. "Because Pamela Anderson deserves a public apology for the way I treated her. She deserves the world to know that she's not some opportunistic woman who tried to trap a wealthy man. She's an extraordinary mother who protected our daughter from a father who wasn't worthy of either of them." Pamela was crying now, great silent tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she loved strip away every protective layer he'd ever built around his heart. "Furthermore," Jose continued, "I want to address the systematic campaign of lies that has been spread about my character by Aurelia Blackwood, a woman whose obsession with destroying my personal happiness has cost innocent people their lives." The name Aurelia sent a chill through everyone watching. Rebecca Morrison's journalistic instincts kicked in fully now. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Levi. They're not accusations. They're facts, backed by legal evidence that I'm turning over to authorities today." Jose's voice turned steel-hard. "Aurelia Blackwood orchestrated the surveillance of Pamela Anderson. She manipulated the revelation of our private relationship for maximum damage. She has spent months systematically destroying my business relationships through lies and manipulation. And most damning of all, 5 years ago she framed an innocent woman named Catalina Morales, driving her to her death to cover up her own crimes." The revelation hit the media like a bomb. In newsrooms across the globe, producers were scrambling to follow this story that had just exploded from a routine business interview into the scandal of the decade. "If these allegations are true," Rebecca said carefully, "why are you revealing them now in this forum?" "Because I've spent too many years letting other people control my narrative," Jose said. "Because Pamela and Lumira deserve better than a man who hides in boardrooms and lets lawyers handle his personal battles. And because I'm restructuring my entire company to create something worthy of the family I'm praying will forgive me." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a legal document. "Effective immediately, I'm liquidating 60% of my personal assets to establish the Lumira Foundation, a trust dedicated to supporting single mothers and their children. The foundation will be administered independently, ensuring that women like Pamela never have to choose between financial security and their children's well-being." Pamela gasped audibly. 60% of Jose's wealth would be hundreds of millions of dollars. He was giving up a fortune for their daughter, for her, for the principle of what he believed was right. "Additionally," Jose continued, "I'm transferring operational control of Sterling and Levi Enterprises to my partner, Elias Sterling, while I focus on what truly matters, being the father and partner that my family deserves." Rebecca Morrison looked like she was witnessing history. "Mr. Levi, the business world will be shocked by these revelations. You're essentially dismantling the empire you spent decades building." "No," Jose said quietly, looking directly into the camera again. "I'm dismantling the prison I built around my heart. The empire was never the point. Love is the point. Family is the point. Being worthy of the trust that Pamela placed in me 3 years ago when she started working for a broken man who didn't know how to love anyone, including himself. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, but Pamela barely heard the rest. Her phone was ringing. Adelaide from next door, Margaret from the office, even Soraya calling from New York, where the story was already breaking on financial networks. But all Pamela could think about was Jose's face when he'd said Lumira's name on live television, the way his voice had broken when he'd called her the love of his life, the magnitude of what he'd just sacrificed for a chance at forgiveness. 3 hours later, there was another knock on her door. This time, Pamela wasn't surprised to find Jose standing in the hallway, though he looked exhausted and emotionally drained from his public confession. "You saw it," he said. It wasn't a question. "The whole world saw it," Pamela replied. "Jose, what were you thinking? You just destroyed your reputation, your business relationships, everything you worked for." "I was thinking that none of it means anything without you and Lumira," he said simply. "I was thinking that I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and empty. I was thinking that maybe, if I proved I was willing to give up everything else, you might believe that you and our daughter are the only things that matter to me." Pamela stared at him, this man who had just shocked the world by choosing love over power, vulnerability over control, truth over reputation. The Jose Levi who had walked into that studio was not the same man who had called her a liar months ago. This man had been stripped bare, his heart exposed for the world to see, and what remained was everything she had fallen in love with 3 years ago. "Pamela," Jose said quietly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge over an impossible chasm. On one side was the safety she'd built in London, the life of careful independence where she could protect her heart from further damage. On the other side was Jose, broken, honest, offering everything he had left for a chance at redemption. "Not because of the foundation or the money or any grand gesture," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "Marry me because I love you. Because I want to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the gift you gave me when you brought our daughter into the world. Marry me because we're better together than we are apart. And because Lumira deserves parents who love each other as much as they love her." Pamela looked into those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for months, seeing past the man who had hurt her to the man who had just laid his soul bare on international television. The man who had given up an empire for love. "Ask me again tomorrow," she said softly, "after I've had time to think about everything you just threw away for us." Jose's face crumpled with relief. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no either. It was hope, fragile and precious, and more than he deserved. "I'll ask you every day until you say yes," he promised, "even if it takes the rest of my life." Chapter 10. Love Conquers. All. 6 months after Jose Levi shocked the world by choosing love over empire, Pamela Anderson stood in front of her bedroom mirror in a simple ivory dress, watching her reflection transform into someone she barely recognized, a bride. The dress was nothing like the elaborate gown Elodie Pemberton had been fitted for all those months ago. This was understated elegance, soft and flowing, perfect for a small ceremony in the garden behind Adelaide Whitmore's London townhouse. Pamela had chosen it not to impress the business world or society photographers, but because Jose had told her she looked beautiful in ivory that first night they'd kissed in his office. "You're glowing, darling," Adelaide said from the doorway, resplendent in lilac silk and the pearl necklace she'd worn to her own wedding 50 years earlier. At 78, she'd become the grandmother Pamela had never had, and the wise counsel that had helped her navigate the most difficult decision of her life. "I'm terrified," Pamela admitted, smoothing the soft fabric over her still flat stomach. "What if I'm making a mistake? What if the man I fell in love with is just an illusion, and the real Jose is the one who called me a liar and a thief? Adelaide moved into the room with the measured grace of someone who'd learned that rushing through life meant missing the important moments. My dear girl, you've had 6 months to observe his character. What does your heart tell you? Pamela thought about those 6 months, the most extraordinary courtship of her life. Jose had kept his word about asking her to marry him every day, but he'd done it with such patience and creativity that each proposal had felt like a gift rather than pressure. There had been the morning he'd arrived with coffee and a single white rose, asking quietly if today might be the day she'd say yes. The afternoon he'd spent 3 hours on the floor of her flat, teaching 6-month-old Lumira to reach for toys, his face full of wonder every time their daughter smiled at him. The evening he'd cooked dinner for all 3 of them, badly, but with such earnest concentration that Pamela had fallen in love with him all over again. He'd found a flat just 2 blocks away, close enough to be present in Lumira's daily life, but far enough to give Pamela space to heal. He'd learned to change diapers, had mastered the art of bottle preparation, and had spent countless nights walking the floors with a fussy baby so Pamela could sleep. More importantly, he'd shown her the legal documents that had destroyed Aurelia Blackwood's life with the same methodical precision she'd once used to try to destroy his. Aurelia was facing fraud charges, embezzlement accusations, and a civil lawsuit that would strip away every penny she'd ever stolen. The truth about Catalina had been revealed, her name cleared, and a scholarship fund established in her memory. He's become the man I always hoped he could be, Pamela said finally. But Adelaide, what if marriage changes that? What if having legal claim to me and Lumira makes him revert to the controlling, ruthless person he used to be? Adelaide sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. Child, let me tell you something about love that I learned in my 50 years of marriage. People don't fundamentally change. They reveal who they truly are when all the masks come off. The man who held your daughter for the first time and cried, who gave up his fortune to prove his love, who stands in my garden right now pacing like a nervous schoolboy, that's not a performance, that's his heart. Through the window, Pamela could see Jose in the garden below, indeed pacing nervously while Elias Sterling tried to calm him down. He looked devastatingly handsome in his dark suit, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, pure love mixed with vulnerable hope. Besides, Adelaide continued with a mischievous smile, if he disappoints you, Soraya has already informed me that she knows where to hide the body. Pamela laughed despite her nerves. Her sister had arrived from New York the day before, armed with enough protective instincts to intimidate a small army and a surprisingly warm acceptance of Jose once she'd seen him with Lumira. She really said that? Oh yes, right after she told him that if he ever makes you cry again, she'll use her legal training to ensure he loses everything he has left. I quite like your sister. A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Dr. Aviora Sinclair appeared in the doorway, radiant in emerald green. She'd become not just Pamela's doctor, but a dear friend, and her presence today felt like a blessing on this new beginning. The guests are seated, she announced, and I have to tell you, I've never seen a more nervous groom. He's asked Elias 3 times if he thinks you've changed your mind. Have you? Adelaide asked gently. Pamela looked out the window again, watching Jose crouch down to adjust the flower girl basket that Lumira would theoretically carry, though at 8 months old she was more likely to try to eat the rose petals than scatter them. His patience with their daughter, his obvious adoration, the way he'd rebuilt his entire life around the possibility of earning their forgiveness. It all pointed to the same conclusion. No, she said firmly. I haven't changed my mind. I love him, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love can survive anything if it's real enough. The ceremony was small and perfect. Margaret Thornbury from the London office sat beside Soraya, who had somehow bonded with Elias Sterling over their shared desire to protect Jose and Pamela's happiness. Mrs. Celestine Moreau had flown in from New York, elegant and emotional, as she watched her best friend marry the man who'd put her through hell before learning to love her properly. But it was Lumira who stole the show, gurgling happily in Adelaide's arms as her parents exchanged vows in the rose garden where Adelaide had once promised to love her own husband through better and worse. At 7 months old, the baby seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying unusually calm as Jose's voice broke slightly while promising to love, honor, and cherish the woman who'd given him everything worth having. "I promise to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me," Jose said, his dark eyes locked on Pamela's face. "I promise to love our daughter with the same fierce protectiveness you've shown her from the moment she was conceived, and I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life grateful for the second chance you've given us." Pamela's own vows were simpler, but no less profound. "I promise to trust in the man you've become, not the man you once were. I promise to build a life with you based on truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that makes us both better than we are alone. And I promise to never again let fear keep us apart." When they kissed as husband and wife, Lumira clapped her tiny hands as if she understood that her family was finally, officially, complete. The reception was held in Adelaide's dining room, decorated with white roses and filled with the quiet joy of people who understood that they were witnessing something rare, a love story that had survived betrayal, separation, and the kind of public scrutiny that destroyed most relationships. "To second chances," Elias toasted, raising his champagne glass, "and to the woman who taught my best friend that some things are worth more than money." "To love that conquers all," Soraya added, her voice thick with emotion. "And to my sister, who had the courage to forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible." But it was Adelaide who offered the toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "To Jose and Pamela," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades. "May your love be modern enough to survive the times and old-fashioned enough to last forever. And to little Lumira, who will grow up knowing that the greatest inheritance parents can give their children is the example of true love." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jose and Pamela found themselves alone in the garden with their daughter. Lumira had fallen asleep in Jose's arms, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt, and the sight of them together made Pamela's heart feel so full it might burst. "No regrets?" Jose asked quietly, swaying gently to keep Lumira comfortable. "None," Pamela said firmly. "You?" "Only that it took me so long to realize that you and Lumira are my real fortune," Jose replied. "Everything else was just practice for loving you." They stood together in the gathering dusk, 3 people who had found their way to each other through heartbreak, misunderstanding, and the kind of forgiveness that transforms souls. In the distance, London hummed with its eternal energy, but here in Adelaide's garden, time felt suspended in a moment of perfect peace. 6 months later, the Lumira Foundation had become the largest support network for single mothers in Europe, funded not just by Jose's initial donation, but by a growing community of donors inspired by his public transformation. Sterling and Levi Enterprises, under Elias's leadership with Jose as a consulting partner, had pioneered family-friendly policies that became the industry standard. But the real victory wasn't measured in dollars donated or policies changed. It was measured in quiet moments. Jose reading bedtime stories to Lumira in 3 different languages, Pamela falling asleep in his arms after long days at the Foundation's London headquarters, the 2 of them watching their daughter take her first steps in the same garden where they'd pledged their lives to each other. "Mama? Papa?" Lumira called out one evening, tottering between them with the determined concentration of a toddler who'd discovered the joy of walking. At 15 months old, she was a perfect blend of both parents, Jose's dark hair and determined chin, Pamela's warm brown eyes and gentle spirit. Jose caught her in his arms, spinning her around until she giggled with pure delight. "Mi princesa," he murmured against her curls. "My beautiful princess." Watching them together, Pamela reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The pain had been real, the betrayal, the fear, the months of separation that had nearly cost them everything. But so was the love that had survived it all, emerging stronger and more precious for having been tested. That night, after Lumira was settled in her crib and the house was quiet, Jose and Pamela sat on their balcony overlooking the London skyline. The city sparkled below them like scattered diamonds, full of other love stories beginning, ending, and beginning again. "Do you ever miss it?" Pamela asked, curled against Jose's side. "The empire, the power, the life you had before?" Jose was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity of it sometimes," he admitted. "When success was measured in numbers and feelings didn't complicate everything." Pamela tensed slightly, old fears stirring, but Jose's arm tightened around her. "But then I remember what that life cost me," he continued. "The loneliness, the emptiness, the way I used control to avoid vulnerability. I wouldn't trade one day of this beautiful complication for a lifetime of that sterile perfection." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You saved me, Pamela. You and Lumira saved me from becoming someone I would have hated. How could I miss a life that was slowly killing my soul?" "I love you," she whispered, the words carrying all the weight of their shared history, the pain they'd survived, the trust they'd rebuilt, the future they were creating together. "Te amo, mi corazón," Jose replied, reverting to the Spanish endearments that still made her heart flutter. "Forever and always, no matter what comes." As they sat together under the London stars, their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, and their love stronger than ever, Pamela thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, broken, pregnant, and fleeing from the only man she'd ever loved. That woman could never have imagined this ending, could never have believed that love really could conquer everything if both people were willing to fight for it. But here they were, living proof that second chances exist for those brave enough to claim them, that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that require both people to shatter completely before they can rebuild themselves into something beautiful. In the distance, Big Ben chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another in the life of a family that had learned that true wealth could never be measured in money, only in moments like this, when love made everything else fade into blessed insignificance.